When you first saw it with an audience, was there a preview? Did a distributor arrange it, or was it still independent and looking for a home?
Well, I saw it at the Cannes Film Festival, and it was and the director Fortnight. It was one of the films, and that's the first audience that I saw it with.
Wow.
I made the film, and it took 3 days to sell it.
But seeing that with the audience for the first time, did you suddenly feel like, wow, they get it?
They reacted, but they didn't react to the red humor.
Right, they
were just so shocked with it.
So for them, it was pure horror. There was no humor to it.
Not for 5 or 6 years.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you feel? Did you expect laughter there? Were you?
I did.
Disappointed?
I was. I was, to the extent that in Chainsaw 2, I gave you enough of it to notice. Yeah.
Chainsaw 2 is one of the most wonderfully, entertainingly grotesque movies I've ever seen. And I mean, body is meat. The body is not a temple in that movie. The body is carnage and carne. And it just seemed like you must have had the best time and hard to keep a straight face during some of those sequences.
Oh, it definitely. Yeah.
Well, was horror your first choice as a filmmaker?
Well, I came from making documentaries, but that was only...
Moving from a documentary on Peter, Paul, and Mary to Texas Chainsaw Massacre is quite a jump.
And that was, of course, a very political film. Peter, Paul, and Mary, and everything they were about was political. Mm-hmm. And then I made a film called Eggshells, and it was about the time troops were coming back from Vietnam.
And you've just restored this film, right?
Yes, yes.
So we'll finally get a chance to see it.
Yes. And but anyway, that film got so few play dates,
right?
That a friend of mine suggested that I do a horror film.
Well, with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, suddenly you went from an obscure filmmaker who had made documentaries and this film Eggshells that had played a few college dates and the like, to a guy who sold his movie at the Cannes Film Festival, was the toast of the town. Everybody was interested in being in business with you. What happened next?
I developed for like 3 or 4 years. Warner Brothers had Salem's Lot, and I was attached to Salem's Lot several times, but it took like 4 years.
And it was going to be a movie
originally. It was going to be a movie with that Friedkin was going to produce. And, well, you know, with Stephen... That's a very heavy piece of work, and so to get a 100-page script out of that particular work, it just wasn't possible. So finally, it went to Warner's Television and became a 4-hour miniseries.
And the irony of it is, the rest of the world, it was cut down to a 100-minute feature film.
It was. It in no way plays as well as the 4-hour version.
No. I mean. What was surprising about that was you were a feature film horror director, shooting something for television, which in the 70s was incredibly rare. Most horror on television was just done by the typical TV directors who had no particular love or fondness for the genre. It was just their next job. And you could see it reflected. That scene outside the boy's bedroom where his brother is outside and the roiling smoke and it's all shot in reverse is the work of a filmmaker and not a hack.
The producer, Richard Kobritz, chose me, and for that reason. I mean, he wanted Salem's Lot to be as much as it could be. He wanted it to scare people, and he didn't want that very thing that you were talking about, where they would just say action and cut and let's get home.
Well, after Chainsaw, though, you did another independent feature, Eaten Alive. Billy Friedkin brought you into a deal at Universal, but first Eaten Alive happened. How did that come about?
Someone called me and said, we want to make this film. Would you come direct it?
And just an offer. And was this the first time that had ever happened to you?
Yeah, it was the first time. And so I came out, and it was a kind of not that pleasant an experience. There was a lot more producers buzzing in my ears. Mm-hmm. But I got to cast who I wanted,
And did that turn into blessing or curse? I hear Neville Brand was not the easiest guy to work with.
because he'd been drinking a lot.
Yeah.
And so we got a nurse, and he started running on the beach, but his consciousness kind of slowly came back. And 2 weeks into shooting, Neville said, "Whoa, I'm here." And
2 weeks.
He was like all yellow. My God, I'm surprised he can walk in here.
Yeah.
But he said, "I know this guy." And he kept saying it until I knew that he was the guy.
He just kept forgetting.
Yeah, he remembered everything.
Oh, good.
But he just didn't. He just thought it was real. That's all. I mean, that's what it looked like to me. And he was always trying to get over what he called his Neville Brand thing, and I don't know exactly what that was.
But he must have. Yeah.
He must have. And
Well, you had a lot of interference from producers and financiers and the like, which must have been an interesting introduction to when you finally did move into the studio situation with the Funhouse. Was that something that Friedkin brought you into?
No, that was a man named Derek Power, and it was a script that I had a chance to work on and embellish. And I really wanted to do it because I was a fan of Nightmare Alley.
Yeah.
And I'd always wanted to do a carnival film. And so I had truly freakish anomaly animals, sideshows. And I saw recently and realized, well, even Nightmare Alley didn't have the kind of carnival I had. And I shot it in Miami because that's the campground for the carnivals that used to, roam across this country.
Right.
It was technically difficult because to get, hundreds of people going in Ferris wheels and machines.
Time it out and
all
all the
time it out.
movement and all the choreography.
There's one shot in that movie. Actually, it's like it's a scene that's done in one shot, and it's dollies in on the couple hiding, or they're talking behind a tent. And there's this kind of octopus ride close by, and you see the lights flash through frame in the background. And it just kept rolling and pulling back. That was reslating. And I would talk to the actors, and then we'd do it again. And anyway, we started feeling raindrops hit us. But there were no, I looked up, there was stars. and then I heard this, this grinding of this octopus gondola machine where there was a spinning gondola inside a spinning arm and another spinning, and looked up against the moonlight, and there was a spray of effluvia coming from the machine, and I could hear sounds of real anguish, and please stop the ride. And the first AD had forgotten to stop the thing between takes. I mean, no one was, they were sick, but they were.
But it could have been worse.
But it could have been worse.
So what about traveling? Did you find your films would be perceived differently in different areas of the world? I imagine Japan would have responded quite vociferously to Texas Chainsaw.
They did. They loved Chainsaw.
That's great.
It was all a learning. It was all about learning. It was all about as much disappointment, I think, as anything else.